Okay, so we're all very welcome here tonight. Once again, I'll just mention to you, anybody attending here, you're all members of the Historical Society by your attendance and by your participation here, for which we charge an exorbitant fee of €1,000. We have a small box for donations at the back there near the door, just for when you're leaving, just to keep us going. Anyway, this evening's lecture is on Nurse Elizabeth Farrell. And without any further ado there, I'd introduce you to a great friend of the Historical Society and the Hysterical Society, Sean mBan.
Thank you very much. And you were one of my better students, not one of my best students, you were one of my better students. Sometimes you do more than me, which is embarrassing. Unfortunately, Scottish done, we're going to Lemufon Cara. McGilla chun na leicre Cumann amán tí sport mar leor na leicre Cumann amán go háirithe Bonitris Farrell. Thanks very much for the invitation and the opportunity to talk to you in the company of my great friend whom I dragged along. I assured her that she wasn't going to give a lecture, that she was just going to share her thoughts with her about her friendship with Elizabeth Farrell from the horse's mouth, as it were. And in particular, her initiative before Nurse Farrell died. So, if I could ask you, May, in the first instance, just to talk about your friendship with Nurse Farrell.
I didn't know I was going to be talking. Well, I knew her well. She was in our party. See, and she lived in Mount Street with Julia Grenan. We used to collect them, to bring them, Sean Cronin and myself. He used to run a taxi, and we used to collect them to bring them to anything that was going on, commemorations or concerts or meetings or anything. That's how I got to know her. And she gave me her story. So it's a true story.
Yeah, as I say, it's kind of from the horse's mouth, and anybody who hasn't read it, it is a totally unaffected description of after the surrender was given. It's the type of thing that you'd read before you turned off the light at night. It's that short, but it's written in such a beautiful hand. She describes, I suppose, the evacuation or the exit from the GPO. And I know a lot of the students here from Tala have done the trip. I don't know whether you've done it in the company of James Connolly, Heroine, one of your friends as well. But it's certainly a great trip to do in and around Moore Street, the National Monument as he calls it. So the evacuation would have come from the Henry Street door just across Henry Street itself, and in around to warren of artesian buildings. Some of them are still there today, still standing today. Some of them were brick factories that built the artesian buildings. And she describes then how they proceeded on, a motley crew proceeded on, Connolly in a bad state, Nurse Farrell herself, Julia Grenan, and the rest, just with nowhere to go, with some sort of vague idea of meeting up with people in the forecourts via the Williams and Woods factory that was over the far side of where the big cinemas are now, and the big blocks of flats are on the far side of Parnell Street. And then she talks about breaking down attempting to get up onto Moore Street itself, and the impossibility due to the barrier or the barricade that was at the top of Parnell Street, and then tunnelling through the gable ends of the buildings up to number 16, and the progress being made, and Connolly being dragged on the stretcher, and then the discussion then around Connolly's, I suppose, the first cabinet discussion. I suppose that the breaking down of the gable end was probably the first capital works programme of the nation, and then the first cabinet meeting, and then we know it's certain plans from the developer. I think it's chartered land to develop it. And I know a lot of the families of the leaders are not happy, and some are happy, so that's a debate that they should have. And then the decision to send Farrell herself out to Moore Street that was laden with bullets coming from the barricade. And indeed, such was the danger to the little girl as she went out to nurse, the young Nurse Farrell, when she went out with her flag. The ceasefire was called, or the surrender was decided upon, I beg your pardon, mate, the surrender was decided upon because Pearse had seen
She went down to General Law with the husband.
And they were told to hold her fire, but in such a situation, particularly what happened afterwards in North King Street and what happened in Moore Street itself, it was a bit of a lottery anyway for her to make her way up Moore Street. Approached the barricade, and on the way, seeing in one of the side streets the prostrate body of the O'Reilly. That really torn her stomach and him slumped. And she describes in her pieces what happened. As she'd be approached, she was treated like a lot of women would have been then, as just second-class citizens. What are you doing? Go on home and mind your own business. And then, as a whim, one of the officers decided to interrogate her again, and then the series of events that culminated in the surrender of all the garrisons, the surrender of Pearse himself, progressed. She was treated fairly indifferently initially, but then such was her demeanour and to her dignity and to her, I suppose, her courage, that she was afforded some respect afterwards, particularly by General Law and his son. Was it? Was he in the Quiet Man? What was his name?
He changed his name from Lowe to very, very similar. Very similar name, and actually appears in the Quiet Man with Arthur Shields.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't know the Quiet Man. Yeah.
He was in 1916.
He was a bit like Dalton, if you remember. I don't know if anybody talked about General Dalton, a very young general in the Civil War. He was sick and tired of the thing afterwards. We discussed this in class, and he went off to become a movie producer in Bray. So other associates of her, Julia Grenan, May has alluded to Julia Grenan, they were lifelong friends, and I think they're buried together up in the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they lived together in Mount Street. They had a flat there.
Yeah. And would you have occasion to visit the two of them?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Two of them came all the time.
Yeah. I suppose she goes on to talk about then going to the different garrisons, or the outposts, including De Valera's outpost at the mills, and the soldiers there who were kept in the mill while the great battle of Mount Street Bridge was going on, and they could hear the regiment, the Sherwood Forest regiments, and the hundreds and scores of little squaddies, or young squaddies, that were killed in and around the bridge. They would have heard that from Boland, and they would have been anxious to reinforce Reynolds and Malone, but that didn't happen. So nothing really happened in the bridge, in the mills, and there was a lot of resentment then when Nurse Farrell arrived, and they pleaded with De Valera not to surrender, and then it was mentioned to him by the driver of Farrell's vehicle that the Helga had just come around the corner at the basin and said, well, look, you've got 15 minutes, and then the mill and everybody in it will be dust. So then De Valera took the proper decision to surrender. Yes, of course.
How did Nurse Farrell become involved at the beginning? You know, how did it all happen for her?
I don't know how. She was in Cumann and everything, you know. She was involved in everything. I don't know how she actually started, you know.
And then you see,
Just knew that she was involved a lot, you know, before she became famous.
would she be a member of Connolly's crowd, the Citizen Army, or would she be on the volunteer side?
I don't think she was in the Citizen Army.
Right, yeah.
What was her function during the rebellion? Was she there as a nurse, or was she a combatant in the same way the same Countess Markovich was?
No, she would have been a nurse. She would have tended to Connolly and tended to the...
She looked after Connolly and in 14, 15, 16 and 17 University, in the four houses. I'm on the University Committee trying to preserve them. But Jim Connolly, the government isn't doing it.
Had she been with the occupying party who first occupied the GPO, initially the Pearses?
Yeah.
She actually went in with them to begin with?
Yeah.
She would have, I suppose, tended to incendiary burns. What did for the post office, which had just gone through a major refurbishment the month before, and it was looking very well, unfortunately, I suppose. She tended, what did for it was the incendiary bombs. The place just went alight and actually explode. The roof came up. for the light, and I suppose she would have been tending to people who were suffering from burns more than bullet wounds, notwithstanding Connolly, who had at that stage got a gangrenous foot. Stained was out and about on Sackville Street, or College Street as it's called now. Any other comments?
Was she provided with transport by the British forces to go and visit the other garrisons as a sort of a envoy of the people that she represented?
She had a driver. There's an account in it that she had a driver.
Yeah,
and there was a Captain Wheeler mentioned as well.
Perhaps with an army vehicle.
Yeah. And indeed, she alludes to the fact that there was some danger in going around the streets, notwithstanding the fact that she was in the company of a British officer. But there was some danger. A lot of danger in that what happened on Mount Street, when they actually took Mount Street and Clonwilliam House, they were in bad form. You know, they weren't in great form at all, particularly what happened then later on, to Maxwell's inquiry into the atrocities in North King Street. And then of course there was the main atrocity of Boland Colthurst. I don't think it's alluded to by Nurse Farrell, who shot the pacifist lads, Geoffrey in his right, and if I recall, 2 other young lads who had allegedly brought the curfew. Anybody else?
She must have been amazing though, because was it a couple of hours before that, the publican going out with the white flag and his wife and the child, and they were shot dead by snipers. I'm sure it wasn't, you know, intentional, but the fact that anyone going out could have been shot, and even with white flag, he and his family were still shot dead. So she must have been terrified walking out onto the street. She had amazing courage, and then to have the Red Cross insignia cut off her arm and that, you know, off her whatever dress she had on. You know, that was amazing, and they accused her of being a spy. Did she ever talk about that? And did she say, was she petrified or was she terrified that she'd be shot?
She was, yeah, she did.
How old was she at the time?
She was very young.
Born in 1883, was she?
Yeah, just get an idea.
Yes, 1883. So well, she wouldn't have been young.
Nearly 40.
Yeah, she was
30.
Victoria. Yeah, young.
33.
Yeah. And then I think she died at 57, wasn't it?
59.
59.
Right, okay. Yeah, Colette, the point that you make is valid in that it was those deaths of that publican lad that prompted Pearse to call the unconditional, or to treat with the Brits. So, I mean, it was in that context that she was sent in with the flag. So you're talking about the confusion, the fog of war, bullets whistled up and down. I mean, they even took one of the wounded British soldier from Moore Street and they tended to him as well in Moore Street itself in number 16.
She was a nurse in Holland Street.
Did she volunteer to go, or was she sent out?
Okay, Pearse sent her up, called for her, and Pearse said to her, will you go and treat with the British? And she said, if that is your wish, I will do it. That was her answer to that. And then she just went off and did what she had to do, perform the duty.
Where did she go when she left the GPO?
Well, there was the initial evacuation of the GPO, but that was the gang, the motley crew that left the GPO with some vague idea linking up with the Forecourt crew. But then, when they actually made the decision around Connolly's Buxton chair or whatever he was on, that was in Moore Street itself. I think it was number 15 Moore Street, and she was sent from there out into Moore Street, turn right up towards where Parnell Street is. So the intersection of Parnell and Moore. And at that stage there was a fairly substantial barricade built there because they couldn't make their way up there because it would have been in the face of the fire. So that's why they had to tunnel their way up through the houses. And there's still see at that gable end, you can still see the new bricks where the hole was filled in. Yeah. That's what if you take the planning permission notice out of the way, there's about 200 planning permission notices in that area. 15 years
So
old.
that was where she met the general, somewhere around there.
No, that's where she met Captain Wheeler, and then the general was called then, and just further up towards Conway's pub, if you understand, that's where the iconic picture of Elizabeth O'Farrell, the one that she doesn't appear in, and the one where she's kind of photoshopped, to be a good word. I think you see her booties, do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the surrender was given, and then Law was there, and I think it's Law's son as well, a good-looking lad with a cap, and I think he's smoking. I think he has a fag, and they're obviously kind of treating Pierce very peremptorily, you know, being the Hun lover and the pro-German. That's what they said as well about Pierce. Nurse Farrell, in her treatise, she says about Pierce, his probably pockets are full of German marks or German rugs or whatever it was. So there was that notion of treachery. How could they do this to us and we in the middle of the biggest war? Like what they did for Casement, I suppose. Later on that August, there was that notion of treachery. And Nurse O'Farrell, notwithstanding the fact that she was a woman, she was a party to the treachery, which just stands out the next week then with the execution. Anybody else?
What did she do when she was all over?
She says when her money was restored to her and she was let go, she said, I walked out the door, and then she says, and that was all my involvement in it. She was like a barrister giving legal advice. She was saying, nothing further occurs, goodbye, end of story, you don't need to know anything else.
Did she go back to nursing in Hollis Street after the war?
She nursed. There's a plaque to her in Hollis Street.
Oh, is there? So the authorities there in the hospital were happy to take her back, even though she had an involvement in the revolution,
Yeah,
whatever it's called.
I think she got word to the priest that General Loudon given his word, and that she told the British officer, and maybe she said that on her release she would make it known how good or what was the word of General Low's word, which resulted in her immediately being...
Yeah, because Low's sense of noblesse oblige was offended, I suppose.
His honour,
His honour, exactly, and he probably said, I won't have a woman making aspersions about me like that, you know. He probably lost it. He had other things to do, I suppose, mopping up the uprising, the rebellion, and I suppose he had Maxwell to deal with as well, who had just arrived at the Royal Hospital there. But that's another story. There's another story that Nellie has, and is often related to me, about her late father, who lived to a great age, Lord be good to him, and his relationship with the Countess, if you wanted to relate that, Nellie.
Miss Martin's.
Countess in Barry's hotel.
Yeah.
That was during the Civil War.
Yeah, he was in Barry's hotel with the Countess. I brought him to a meeting there we had, and Tom was speaking up at the table, and when he came down, he says, "What's your father looking out the window for all the time?" So we asked, and he said, "See that window there? That's where I was with the Countess." And there was a sniper firing across hers, and she said, "Count so many bricks," and fire. And they got the sniper. That was in Barry's.
That was during the Civil War, May, yeah?
Yeah. I asked them in Barry's would they put a little plaque or something to say she got there, but they didn't.
Was she a married lady? Did she have children?
Huh?
Did she have children?
Did Nurse Farrell ever marry him?
Maybe she could have been without me, no.
I think it's important to say probably at the time nurses never married. It was a vocation. And I'm an elf, and I suppose that, you know, you have a great graph for Elizabeth.
You're only half married anyway.
Only half married, yeah. But the thing is, the people in Pearse Street Flats have raised a plaque to her in the last, I think it's probably 15, 20 years. And every Easter, that's my gig, I do the commemoration there, but they've raised a plaque out of their own money. It was collected in the area, and they raised a plaque to Elizabeth Farrell. And the other thing about her is that
there's an award every year for the best nursing student. I thought it was in the Manor, but it could be Hollis Street, I'm not sure. But for the best nursing student called the Elizabeth O'Farrell Award. And it's still going to this day, and it's for the best nursing student who does, obviously, as they're told, and you know, their homework and whatever. But that's still in my memory continuing on. But just to say the day, nurses never got married. We were a bit like nuns at that stage. We just didn't get married. You weren't expected to. It was a vocation. You were hardly paid. Obviously, hopefully things have moved on a little bit since then.
Well, Julia Grenan would have been our great aunt.
Yeah.
She lived with her, she's buried with her, so she would have been her pal, she would have been her family. Yeah, yeah.
Where was she, sorry, I don't know anything about my shame. Where was she born? Was she Dublin? Where was she born?
I think, well, from the book, do you know, and there was a bit of disappointment about this, do you know the bridge, the footbridge, the new footbridge that would link the Financial Services Centre to Lombard Street?
Yeah.
You know, the City Key Church there. So that was called after Sean O'Casey or something.
Yeah.
But just on the south side of that, there was a tenement block, and she was born there. I beg her pardon, she grew up there, and she lived there. And there is, and I don't know more, is it the same tablet as you're alluding to? There is, right there, as you turn right, you're coming down the quays, and the church is on your right, and then you're shooting up towards the Birds and Deaths. Just there at the corner, there is a plaque commemorating Nurse Farrell. But it's a little bit disappointing in that, seeing as the new bridge was there, I mean, the new bridge is only 10 years there or less, and seeing as she was lived there, it's a pity they didn't call the bridge afterwards. I mean, we were at an event organised by Myra there last Friday, and they was good enough to turn up as well. And one of the historians at that alluded to the fact that there's no bridges in Dublin called after women at all. And I think there's 8 called after men, and then 3 called after something else. Which one? Well, yeah. Yeah.
And there's a bridge waiting to be named.
Yeah.
Well, this is the one. Yeah. You see, and I'd say Connolly had grabbed that one, you know, being so near the headquarters. But it's just a pity that that footbridge would have been a nice low-key footbridge, which would have been kind of right beside where she lived, or at least grew up. Another, just to mention another, I suppose, heroine of the revolution that May was involved with, as a much younger woman, I'm sure May would have been. Do you want to tell the one about? Well, I don't think there's much of it, that when you were talking to Maud Gone.
No, we had we used to go to McBride's. I was in Flanagale, the Republican Girl Scouts when I was young, and we used to have a sport every year in Roebuck House, where they lived in McBride's, and there was a field beside it, and we used to do our sport, you know, and running and all the rest. And that's how I met her there. But I also, we had a fancy dress every year in that place they used to. It's gone now. It's off North Frederick Street. You know, when you turn around that little road there, there was a big hall there, and we used to fancy dress there every year, and they dressed me as the Bog of Allen. I had the granny shawl and a basket of turf in my hair. And I won a prize, and Maud Gone presented me with the prize. So I met her.
Did Nurse O'Farrell take part in the War of Independence or the Civil War or anything like that? Did she take part?
Yeah, a lot of. Oh, we were discussing this in class. In 1918, women got suffrage for the first time, and it was then, particularly that Sinn Féin cruised in, and the Irish Parliamentary Party were just, no, I won't say decimated, whatever the big word for decimated is. They were just wiped out. Yeah. And that would have been because a lot of people, and particularly then the treaty, then later on when the treaty, the vote on the treaty and the first constitution, based on the treaty, you know, a lot of women who had just been enfranchised then would have said, I don't want fellas to go off to war anymore, I and they would have voted for the treaty. Different priorities. They would have wanted things to be settled, for families to get on, for men not to be killed, husbands, fathers, sons not to be killed. So the preponderance of women would have gone that way. But it's funny enough, the protagonists, Nurse Farrell, Markovich, Pierce's mother, Connolly's sister, all those type of people, McSweeney's sister, all those type of people, they went anti-treaty. A lot of the women went anti-treaty, didn't they? You went anti-treaty, but you would have been very young at the time.
Well, that's the way I was reared.
Yeah, your father was anti-treaty.
Did you go anti-treaty afterwards? She did? Yeah, good for her.
Yeah, she was with us.
Would she have known your father, mate?
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember that.
Yeah. Commemoration of the hunger strikers on your left, and then the Curragh mutiny there. And right beside that is the grave of Nurse Farrell and Julia Grenan, the two of them are there. But I'm nearly sure to see it in my head. It says 57. Must check it the next time. Yeah.
Sean and May, what would your thoughts be on why in some pictures she's there pushed out of the photograph?
Because she was a woman. Like Naomi, I suppose.
Yeah, they tried to brush her shoes out. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I think they're standing in front of the rotunda, opposite Conway's pub.
Yeah. Well, that's
Because you can just about make out the Parnell monument down the street, and
Yeah.
mainly by the railings.
yeah.
But you have Lowe and the son, you have Pierce, and then she is partially occluded by Pierce with
the what you call that hat.
and his grey coat.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can just about see the tail of her coat, maybe
Yeah.
shoes and that type of
I
thing.
think
But you see her in some photographs and you don't in others.
Yeah.
One of the newspapers,
The
wasn't it?
newspapers,
Do you know what newspaper? If you knew what newspaper it was, you could probably get the original name.
Yeah. I think I went to ERT for an entry on it a while back. They dragged a half an hour out of it, or 28 minutes.
They
Well-
teach in schools a lot, and a niece of mine was telling me in school they were taught that was the Catholic chair influence of the time. They didn't want women to have high situations in politics, and that they were sick of the likes of Countess Markovich and that, so they didn't want women to follow.
Which would probably be to say that then it was probably the Sunday Independent. That would be a problem. Well, the times would have been evening, you know. There would be the Martin Murphy and his chums.
It kind of stands to reason when you think of politics at the time, the power the Catholic Church started to have in the New State, and the power they did have in the first, 40 to 50 years of the New State.
It did. And Countess Markovich herself, when the first cabinet was there, she was the first female cabinet member, and I think she got Labour. She had to drag that out of them. She basically had to drag it out of them. She wasn't getting the job, and she dragged it out of them. She had a good 1916. There is allusions to the fact that, is it Wiley? Yeah, Wiley says she had a bad 1916 in relation to her court-martial. He says that she basically whinged and said you can't shoot me, I'm the woman. And apparently she had no axe, or he had no axe to grind, but it doesn't fit with the woman's character.
It doesn't scan that.
No, it doesn't scan. Yeah. But then he's no axe to grind. The court papers were published by Blackstone Press. It was all done in a kind of systematic way. It all had its own kind of format, and it does Markovich's, and there's no allusion to the fact that she was whinging or said anything like that. But then again, you might say that the sense of propriety that Blackadder had, or that the British officers had who formed the court-martial, might have said, well, let's not let her down. I don't know. Personally, I would like to think that wouldn't be an error. In relation to another woman hero of the revolution, and I'll deal with this very briefly, from a personal point of view, I think May herself, I don't agree with, it's not that I don't agree with her politics, I wouldn't be into her politics, and she's very passionate, and for years we all know she was behind Tomás McGilligh, who was very strong in this area, and particularly in Ballyfermot. But I mean, in relation to issues in the 60s that I think have been diminished, that I think have made, haven't been really highlighted, like the fishing rights, the leasehold problems with freehold land, the Housing Action Committee, all that work that they did during the 60s.
It's on the Housing Action.
Yeah.
Even fishing. They're the north of some of these things. can't remember what his name was, because he wouldn't let the fishermen in, down in Innishtee.
Kenny, yeah, yes, no idea.
And he wouldn't let the fishermen fish there. So we had a protest, we went down, and we all went down fishing. They sent me around all the boats with the fish.
That is what other claim to fame is that, well, I'm not going to say, but you were a long time gone to Bolandstown, a long, long time, every year in a row for many, many, many years, from a baby as a 2-year-old. You showed me
79 years.
79, you said it, 79.
Well, Tom doesn't do something for me.
Except for the 2 years you went to America and Mauritania. Mauritania, yeah. Anybody else have any questions or comments? I had promised May that it would be kind of not a lecture, it would be just a kind of a discussion. It's on that basis that I dragged her here by the looks, you know.
What cemetery is she buried in?
Last member Republican.
No, at the end, when the surrender was negotiated, all the commandants had marched themselves into the bag of the British. What was the next thing that happened to Nurse O'Farrell? I mean, after, Lowe came back and he wanted to be very honourable with her, and indeed, money she had collected from some of the volunteers to deliver to their parents, to their wives, etc., was even returned to her. I think it was £16 or something like that. So what happened next? Did she go into internment?
No, she was released.
She was
That's the dimension that she mentioned. That she was released. Goodbye, you're finished. And that's what she said. I exited the building, closed the door, and that finished my involvement in the surrender. And she says it in such a lovely way in that you've asked me to relate what happened. I've related it. Goodbye, I'm finished. You know? And May and her other friends were the ones behind getting Nurse O'Farrell to write it down. And even from reading, you know that there's so much sincerity and dignity and honesty in it, and it's not subject to revisionism or to interpretation. She just calls it as a way in the lovely style that she had. I'm sure she was a lovely person.
Complimentary to the two officers, isn't she?
Yeah.
In it, it's in what she says, she thought Wheeler and the other officer were very.
Absolutely, there was no distinction between the officers in the Oakland and the Heroine and the officers of, say, the Foresters or the Royal Irish. There was no distinction. She treated them and she described them all as gentlemen, you know, not Inglets and Irish great men, just them all the same, yeah.
Could I ask, please, how did she feel in her later years about how Irish society had evolved under the independence that we did get?
She was still giving out, she was.
Good on her.
Yeah, I dare say she'd have something to say about what's happening now.
Do you know whether any other members of the nursing profession with the garrisons around the various sites in Dublin? Was she unique in that respect?
I think there was another nurse with her in the GPO. Everybody else was sent away, and the two of them were left to tend to the wounded. In relation to the other garrisons, I don't know. I only know there is a mention of a nurse Keogh who was not attached to the garrison in the South Dublin Union, but who was killed in Crossfire when the Rialto Gate was attacked, and coming back they were withdrawing into the nurses' home. You know, as you went to James's Hospital, there's a nice building on the right hand side, that's the nurses' home. That was the last stand of the South Dublin Union, Emmett Camp's crowd, so I mean, Brewer would have been in there. That's where Brewer took his 11 bullets and still survived and was left for dead. That's how he dodged the firing squad. And then I think he was shot later on by a bullet in the leg during the Civil War, coming out of Hammond Buildings. I don't know if your father was in Hammond Buildings.
No, he was outside the Gresham area.
Yeah, Hammond Buildings around the corner.
One of the lads was shot. They sent the priest, and the priest came around and said, "Is he an irregular?" That's what they called him at the time. They said, yeah, sorry, I can't give him absolution. So he said they put the gun to the priest's head. Don't give him until you're going to.
We gave him absolution.
They were all sent then to, you know that church there in the Keys, what do you call it, Franciscans?
Martin
No? Yeah.
St. Anthony's.
He says there was about 60 or 80 of them, and they were all excommunicated, and they were sent there then to the priest, and the priest there said, I don't want to hear what you were in, and just tell me your sins, and gave them all absolution. Took them all back.
No, the Capuchins were very pro anti-treaty, if you know what I mean. And they had a great role in 1916, the Capuchins in George Street.
Yeah.
There was a particular priest there, and I forget his name now. Anybody else anything? As I say, May came along just on the basis of sharing the history. I just wanted the society to get some kind of horse's mouth relation of what happened. I mean, I'm sure school kids going to school today doing history would look and probably appears the way we would look on Setanta. I mean, it's just in the midst of time. A lot of us would have remembered the 50th anniversary and would have remembered, I personally would have remembered the commemorations of the 50th. With your friend, my Uncle Charlie, one of the 40s men, with his hand and watching them put up this big, I don't know if anybody remembers it, would you remember being from the area, putting up these big pictures of Kent and his moustache and kind of a montage outside.
I've started seeing photographs of it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they've been taken away with progress, and the last stand there is all that's left, just above Mount Brown there, just a hill. They just don't know what to do with it. As the new hospital progresses, 7 hospitals, I think there's an 8th hospital getting built now. I think the Children's Hospital is there. Yeah. So there's just a little corner. There's the nurse's home itself, which is in pristine condition. You can go in there and look around. There's a kind of a derelict part, as a juts or a butts or whatever the word is onto Mount Brown Hill. That's still there in dreadful condition.
Was May ever locked up? Like, in other words, she wasn't locked up after 1916. She wasn't.
Yeah, May was locked up already. May was locked up. Yeah. You were locked up once.
Still need them 1 week about her.
Elizabeth, sorry. Was Elizabeth ever locked up?
Yeah, I think she was, wasn't she?
Which?
Elizabeth.
Oh, during.
She wasn't interned after 1916.
Oh, no, she was free to. Margaret, do you know, you did a lot of work on the women of Cumann, and there was a lot of people, women interned in Cumann, during that period, particularly during that 21-22 period. You didn't come across a Farrell, did you?
No, she wasn't. She wasn't
Okay.
interned.
Yeah.
I think she walked away after.
Yeah, you did a documentary on the women of Cumann.
I did.
Yeah.
May was interviewed on it as well.
Just on a little point, my mother tells me she's an old Tala woman, and that the Countess Markovich actually came out to Tala. Maybe she came out here all the time, but this was just one occasion to visit her brother, who was dying of consumption, which he got from being in the Curragh, you know, and he was on the Davenier's side in the Civil War. So he lived, the houses are still there, the cottages up on the Old Bond Road as you go up there on the right hand side, and they had a big garden, and they had to put a tent out in the side garden. That was what they did to isolate her brother, and the Countess Markovich came to visit him. So I just thought I'd let you know that she came to Tala anyway on one occasion. She probably did that too.
Yeah, but that's what probably did. She died, as Moira alluded to last week when she gave that speech down in to celebrate the women of the lockout last Friday. It was a fantastic. May came down as well, and Moira's speech included a reference to, among others, Countess Markovich. And Countess Markovich died young of an old age. She died of, lugging coal up tenements, and she died in the public ward as an old woman at the age of 57. So, I mean, that doesn't, no surprise that she came out to talk to your mother about, in relation to the TB, yeah.
Visit the brother,
Yeah, or the brother, beg your pardon, yeah.
He would have been young, my mother was
Yeah.
younger, yeah.
When she dissociated herself from politics and when she could have probably decoupled herself from De Valera, there was a lot of, she did a lot of good works. And we've been down to Lissadell, and May was given a private tour of Lissadell by the Cassidys that were down there now. They're closed for business, but we kind of persuaded them to talk to Meg when we went down about 4 or 5 years ago. Margaret was good enough to bring us down. Margaret was with us as well, Margaret Roach. And she could have easily gone back to the corporates and lived a beautiful life there, but she didn't. She stayed in Dublin. And I think that's why she's revered by the people of Dublin.
Did Nurse O'Farrell have any brothers or sisters? Were there any families?
Is there any families that yeah.
I thought she was amazing though, the way she kept on till she got the money back for the guys, for their wives, their families. She was determined. I mean, you know, such courage and such loyalty to make sure, as you say in that little booklet, that she fought to get the money back and to see that it went back to the people it was intended for. It made her a terrific person as well, I think.
She was certainly a very brave lady, because having gone out there and just shaking a white flag right in front of her, trying to establish contact with the British, there was an awful lot of sporadic shooting and fighting going on for a long time after the Rising.
That was random, yeah.
The day Pearse was executed, a priest was shot dead in Haddington Road.
Yeah.
Like another lad there, I was looking up there a while ago, can't really find any good reason for it. A lad called Cunningham was shot down on the Wingsend Road.
Yeah.
Long after.
Yeah.
So
there was outposts, all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly outposts. And even
both sides were still shooting sporadically.
As I say, as the executions were going, there's even descriptions of families, cars being sent for families to bring the family to see the condemned, and even notwithstanding that it was a British soldier, a British car, or a British armoured car, or whatever it was, and a lot of the families, or a lot of the historians, I know, Max Caulfield describes it. He did the one on 1916 in anticipation of the 50th anniversary. He describes families coming at the dead of night to see their loved ones and trying to get through barricades and literally dodging bullets at night, trigger happy. But then again, there was a lot of damage done on Mount Street, and then Mount Street Bridge is a reclaim assembly on the bridge to commemorate all those who perished on both sides. And then we go across the way, just literally go across the road to the old schoolhouse, and there's a meal there, 3-course meal in the old schoolhouse. We're taking over the restaurant, so we need a few numbers. And as I say, John McWigan has given a treatise on the Sherwood Foresters.
Of the surrender and her account. Is it in the archives? Is it in with the government? Is it like, is it within the National Treasury that we might have, or you know, is it going to be book bound, or pardon?
I don't think so.
Well, I mean, it's a story that has, and it's a really simple, very.
Yes.
There's no elaboration. It's factual, completely factual. But I mean, it should be within their National Treasury, you know. Yeah, it should be in the archives.
Yeah. She was a low-key lady.
Well, it belongs to the National Library or somewhere, you know, just to keep it in, and to have it bound and respected.
There's a lot of information out on Mount Street Bridge, sort of, and some graphic descriptions of the fighting in Northumberland Street and Clanwilliam House. But if you're unable to come across anything for the similar situation that took place in North King Street and Riley's Fort there.
Absolutely.
Nothing.
Yeah, King Street gets very sloppy, doesn't it?
Yeah. You can find nothing definite or anything. And apparently there was a similar sort of event happened up there, you know.
Yeah, it's very sloppy. It's very difficult to get something definitive on North King Street. The only definitive thing you can get on North King Street is the War Office report on the investigation commissioned by Maxwell.
Yeah.
But that gives it from a completely different perspective.
But maybe even about sort of the atrocities that were committed after, but the actual fighting and the Riley's Fort battle and that, Little or nothing.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to find anything on it.
Yeah, I know there was a book written, Blood on the Streets, in relation to Paula Bryan wrote it, in relation to the South Dublin Union, Kevin's Hospital.
Yeah.
And Caulfield deals with Mount Street really definitively, if you obviously you've read him. No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
He's dead now, Paddy Kelly, who was a commandant for the IRA unit in North King Street. And he's written his account of it. And it's with his son, Paddy.
Yeah.
If anybody, like, I guess he didn't think it was of interest to anybody except
He would
the
be.
family.
Yeah.
So what would he do with that?
Paddy, who was it? It was your uncle, was it?
He would have been, he was married to an aunt of mine.
What age would a man have been? Would it be 90
He's dead
now?
a long time
Would it
now.
be 93 or 94 now?
I'd say, well, that and
Yeah.
more, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know where Paddy Kelly was from? Yeah.
He ended up, he lived afterwards in Pottle Park, and he became a station commander in, I think, Dolphin's Barn or Pierce
You
Street.
don't know whether he was interned in the current in the 40s, do you?
To my shame, I don't. I was given the thing to read, and it was actually so blood chilling
Yeah.
that I just put it down. I thought,
Right, okay.
Where is it? You still have it though, do you?
well, I can get it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just make an observation, but you mentioned the building facing down Mount Brown.
You know it, do you?
South Dublin Union.
Yeah, opposite Cromwell's quarters.
My granduncle was in the garrison there, and during the 50th anniversary celebrations, I brought him over to there and got the key of the building. Even then it was there from the caretaker, and he gave me a very graphic account
Fantastic.
of what actually happened there. And he
Now,
said
this is not the nurse's home.
no, it's
This
a
is the
building
one-
that comes out at right
Gotcha,
angles.
yeah,
It's
I know
there's
the one.
only 2 windows wide.
Yeah, I know
He
it.
said that's what they were. There's a group of them on either side of each window.
Yeah.
And he said that the soldiers just marched down the middle of the road, coming from the Cumann direction.
Coming from Richmond Barracks.
And when they fired on them, he said they just lay on the road. They
Yeah.
didn't even take cover most of them.
Yeah.
And they picked a lot of them off. Every time one of them moved, they were picking them off.
Yeah, well, they're from the height, see, Mount Brown. So the height gives them the
He
advantage.
also gave me a fairly graphic account of the withdrawal then. He wound up in Maragone Lane.
Yeah.
But he subsequently gave me his 1916 medal and his 50th anniversary medal.
Yeah.
He gave me his 1916 armband and his Irish Volunteers lapel badge, which I treasure greatly.
Absolutely.
And both of us were at the GPO in 1966. I was on the FCA Guard of Honour. He
Right.
was on the Veterans Guard of Honour.
Yeah.
outside the
And
GPO.
were you at the commemorations at the South Dublin Union then as well? Obviously, he would have gone to that.
I wasn't actually at
But he
that.
would have been there.
He was, of course.
Yeah.
He used to take a very active part in all of the old IRA.
Yeah.
My wife was in Cumann, and she was a sleeper. She was a telephoner. She's listed in the 1911 census as a telephone operator.
In Crown Alley?
Yeah, she was one of the early telephone
Yeah,
operators.
yeah.
I think even from way before that.
Mm.
And she was in Cumann and passed information on to Michael Collins by eavesdropping on telephone conversations. And that's the only active part she ever took,
Yeah.
actually. But both of them reared my father. Subsequently, he was a died in the Walsh rest
Yeah,
of his life.
yeah, yeah.
So he's done quite a lot of research and
Yeah.
gave a very good lecture.
Yeah, there's a book in that King Street. There's definitely a book in it, you know. Irish McCarthy, what's it, the History of Modern Ireland, is it? The Irish Republic.
Yeah, Irish Republic.
Yeah, the Irish Republic. I mean, she goes into the nth degree about stuff, like, you know. But she's definitely, if you can get your hands on a Dorothy McCarthy, I know Tomas was good enough to give me his one, which was originally your father's one.
Yeah.
And I still have that and I treasure it at home. And I remember your father, that'd be good to your father, if I told you this. You could see when he was reading McCardle, and in the margin he had this very light ink pen. And when he disagreed with something, particularly when there was an allusion to Devil Era, he'd underline it, this did not happen. It was magnificent, to, you know, from his hand who was there, to see, this did not happen, and then you'd see lies and lies, like, you know. But it kind of, the seismologist or the seismograph only started to go like this when Devil Era's name was mentioned, you know.
said you were in Mount Joy yourself for the weekend. Maybe you might like to share that. That was such.
I was on some protest and I can't even remember what one it was. There's on millions of them.
But you met as Lady Mayor Eston, I think you met the member of the judiciary that put you away, didn't you? You got introduced them.
Oh yeah. What's his name?
Was all Huey?
Yeah. And I was introduced to him by what do you call that woman that just died? She's a writer.
Oh, Meg Binchy.
Meg Binchy, yeah. Meg Binchy introduced me to this man, and she says to me, "Do you know him?" I said, "Yes, I do. He put me in jail for a week." There was a Jesuit, a Capuchin priest, Father Levinus was his name, and he came around and got us out. Church.
And do you remember you were saying that it was really important that it be reclaimed before it...
The Chartered Lands, the developer, have just recently, in the last couple of weeks, have come up with a proposal and put it to the families and the nursery committee in relation to keeping 14, 15, 16 and 17 and putting some sort of montage or kind of a representation of what happened, but just confined to that mid-terrace section, whereas a lot of the more bullish, and I use that in a nice term, bullish sections, particularly James Connolly, Heroine, who's an excellent historian and really passionate about it, he wants the whole thing refurbished, and he has this vision about it's the centre of town, it's a little village in the middle of town, like you'd have them in Italy or France when you go into this old quarter, and he wants to develop that as an old quarter with representations of where the O'Reilly fell, where the Borough through, where the cabinet meeting took place, where Nurse Farrell came up, where the injured soldier was taken into custody, and where the surrender was given in the end. And in that small area, there's a lot of buildings are still there, but they're in dreadful condition. But I mean, a good architect could come up with some sort of ideas about it. I can actually see it in my head. You know, by reference to little towns in Italy or little towns in France, the same thing. People wandering around, cafes, bistros, little interpretation centres. A bit like what they did. Has anybody been to Krakow?
Yes.
The Jewish quarter in Krakow. Did you see what they did with the Jewish quarter in Krakow? You know, the old shops and with the names, but nothing behind them, but just a depiction of them. And because there's no Jews left in Krakow anyway, they managed to get them all. You know, they did a good job in Krakow, I can tell you. Absolutely, yeah.
It was Riley the builder that knocked the Royal Dublin, and he wanted to knock the whole of Mercia.
Just to say then that South Dublin came to council, we had a motion last year, not just 14, 15 and 16, but the entire lot. And it's been passed, so that's obviously then fed into the government as well. But the motion was passed to revamp the entire lot, and not as the chartered, whatever those chartered lands want, but as a historic, important site of natural.
Yeah, it's going to miss the deadline though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Whatever happens, we'll miss the deadline. I think the vista from chartered land are coming up. We can do this before 1916. Well, because there's not much really to do. Yeah.
Leave it.
Well, you certainly can't redevelop it before 1916.
No,
it won't be.
Leave it as it's a shame then by 1916.
I know that some of the students, we went around one lovely winter's morning, we went around and we wandered around the place and we looked at the old good old factory, which still had the name, you could still see the name, and then you could see where the breach was made in the gable end, and you could see the little streets just still there, kind of still there, echoes of the past, but you know, really in dreadful condition. But I mean, we've really developed worse places, so it's just a pity. It's an awful pity.
The only commemoration there really is the small plaque high up on the wall. Yeah. One binoculars really to be used.
Absolutely, and
then the O'Reilly.
The O'Reilly thing.
And
that's right. You said the extractor from the Chinese restaurant. Yeah.
And there's letter pen on the wall there.
Yeah.
And then on the far side of the street, if you remember, there's a kind of a gateway like maybe to an underground car park.
Yeah.
And there are profiles of of the leaders that surrender.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's on Moore Street itself.
That's on Moore Street. The biggest commemoration there is there on a car park gate.
Yeah. And it's ironic that the greatest battle, or the greatest historical site we have is Kilmainham, and the government was going to knock that down until your gang took it over, your friends took it over in the early 60s and made it what it is today. Fantastic place what it is today.
The 40s men.
The 40s men, they took it over. A lot of people from the corporation in summer's evenings and weekends came up and put a roof on it, and apprentices honed their trades, roofers, electricians, and made it what it was, and then handed it back to the OTW. And now it's a fantastic asset. But I mean, that was when the first cabinet was there. She was the first female cabinet member, and I think she got Labour. She had to drag that out of them. She basically had to drag it out of them. She wasn't getting the job, and she dragged it out of them. She had a good 1916. There is allusions to the fact that I mean, is it Wiley? Yeah, Wiley says she had a bad 1916 in relation to her court martial. He says that she basically whinged and said, you can't shoot me, I'm the woman. And apparently she had no axe, or he had no axe to grind, but it doesn't fit with the woman's character.
It doesn't scan.
No.
Of all libraries in Ireland, let alone Dublin, nationally. And this here was published by the National Commemoration Committee, and many years ago was that.
I can't remember when this started.
I suppose it has to be 60 years ago, May, anyway.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah, but it was lying around and there wasn't. We reprints it, in latter years.
And that, as Sean referred to earlier, Nurse Farrell Elizabeth just signs off in our account of those couple of days, those couple of heady days in 1916. She says, thus finished my activities in connection with the surrender. In concluding, I would like to say that I found General Lowe, Captain Wheeler and Lieutenant Royal most courteous. So it's a quite unaffected account, and a very truthful account of what happened during those few days.
And I've ordered more. That's all I had left.
Anybody who hasn't got one, put the best rest of the same.
So thanks very much, Sean.
Thank you.